And with that as a prelude, I think we should turn it over at this point to Bernhard for his presentation. Bernhard, I think if you are going to share slides, I think there you are. You're on your way, and we look forward to hearing your presentation. And I'm going to mute and listen.
All right, let me first make sure the usual Zoom mechanics of am I sharing the right screen? Well, I'll start with that prompt of what's on the reading list. And turn off my video as well. I didn't mean to do that. I am reading a book called Rubicon, The Triumph and Tragedy of the Roman Republic, which maybe is a little bit different, but it's about disruption and a different type of disruption, which we're I think experiencing in the world or re-experiencing today. It's a little bit about historic parallels with the present, and that's in a way the theme of my talk today. So I called this strategic agility in the age of AI. I put the two logos of the two outfits that I work with or work for today on here. So I've had a long interest in leadership development, in communications, in coaching. I'm an executive coach, and that's the work that we do with PBJ, Purpose Balanced Journey. And then I've also been, in a way, an accidental strategist. I came to strategy by the way of market intelligence and marketing, ended up being the corporate strategy lead for Intel for many years, and developed this interest in how do strategy and leadership development and coaching intersect. And that's the type of work that I do. And as you can imagine, as I'm working with clients and companies these days, a lot of that ends up being about, what the hell is going on with AI and how do we make sense of that? So that's what I wanted to offer a little bit of stimulus for. I'm going to move relatively quickly here. I don't have a lot of groundbreaking, I think, new ideas to share, but maybe a little bit of sense making of what's going on. And then I'd love to hear from you all on how do you think about this space that's kind of so complex, so dynamic, and so disruptive. I'll start it with this screenshot, which dates me a little bit, takes me back in time. And the reason I put this in is I've had the opportunity or maybe the burden of seeing what I think are two massive technology disruptions play out in my lifetime. The first one was definitely this age of the internet. This ad is back from 1998 when I started my marketing career at Intel. And we were at that time, starting to ride the wave of the internet, which was transforming everything. And, there was a lot of hype. There were internet-connected toilets that were being launched. There were millions that were being spent on advertising Super Bowl ads on sock puppets, if you remember, pets.com, all that good stuff. And a lot of noise, and Intel, of course, had to be part of that noise as well. We said we have the Pentium 3. The Pentium 3 is what you need for a better internet experience. And what we're living through today in a way reminds me of that time. Like we've seen this movie of disruption, technology disruption before. Today feels like there's something going on that's really, really powerful, maybe even more powerful than the internet disruption or transformation, because it's actually technology disruption layered on top of technology disruption. But it's also, there's just so much noise. So the question I ask myself, what can we learn from the past? Like, what do we know? What do we not know? One thing in the strategy work that Brandon and I do with Trigate, we like to point to is that there's historical patterns of how disruptive technologies, change the world. And the typical three phases that you can identify over and over again is kind of a first phase where there's really just a new technology that's being used to create more kind of linear changes, linear impact in the internet age. That was we're going to put our content on the internet, CNN.com, or, I dug out the original screenshot of Amazon's, first web page here where they were starting to sell books. Right. So it's like the more linear impact, just looking for efficiencies. And then you move pretty quickly to new capabilities and business models being reinvented. And you start getting that nonlinear impact. But then the systemic transformation And I would argue we're well into that, obviously, with the internet transformation now, where the technology really becomes the backbone, the fabric of everything, the way the world works, comes later in a third phase, right? And that's if you just follow the trail of retail as an example, going from books, right, and just selling them on the web to inventing new business models like one-click shopping or Amazon Prime, like these subscription services. To today, I would say Amazon really is the backbone of all retail. Not only with their own e-commerce offerings, but really with AWS and like just the systemic infrastructure that's been built there. So there are these historical patterns, and then now let's talk about how is that playing out with AI. I dug out this chart here, which really plots the AI capabilities over relatively recent time on some relatively narrow domains and how they trail or exceed human capabilities. And you can see that very quickly AI is starting to outperform humans in many of these narrow tasks, whether that's reading or speech recognition or even predictive reasoning. And the pace seems to be accelerating. And now it's tempting to extrapolate from that and say, well, obviously, general artificial intelligence must be around the corner. And then I juxtapose that with, well, let me think about this. I've been living in Mountain View in the heart of Silicon Valley, the heart of Google, for the last now 19 years. And we had back in 2009, this is an actual picture from 2009, we had these self-driving cars driving around and doing these field trials. And I have a 17-year-old son. So my son at that time was 2 years old. I was convinced he would never need a driver's license. Fast forward to today, 16 years later, these things are starting to make their way into the environment, right? You can hail taxi cabs, self-driving taxi cabs in San Francisco. In the heart of Silicon Valley in Mountain View, they're starting to roam without drivers, but I'm still not able to hail a ride, right? So there's this duality of, yes, disruption happens very quickly, but then sometimes it stalls. And at the core, we're, as humans, just very bad about making accurate predictions, I would say, especially when it comes about, predictions about the future. So again, some caution is in order as well. So with that backdrop, then, how do we think about strategy in the age of AI? And as I mentioned with my colleagues in our Trigate practice, we've been spending a lot of time about like how do we think about strategy generically, and like how do we demystify strategy. So I thought let's just start with what's strategy and how does that relate to leadership. One thing that we did in our work at Intel, when Brandon and I were in the corporate strategy office, we set out on a task to say, like, can we find a simplified framework that really demystifies strategy? So read all these strategy books. Some of them I have behind me on my shelf. There's many more. They look at strategy on all sorts of angles. They have specialized models for product market fit and so on and so forth. Some of them are more generic. And if you take the essence of, we believe, all of them, what you end up with is a very simple, but we found very powerful, generically applicable strategy development framework that we codified into 3 phases. Now, none of this is going to surprise you because you are all smart people and strategists at heart. But as we've brought strategy to practitioners, we felt it was actually very powerful to say, well, let's think about strategy in 3 specific steps that are that you can follow and that you can iterate on, and basically say, we boil it down to a statement that says strategy is a set of choices leading to coherent actions to achieve our aspirations, right? So there's 3 operative words in there. There's the notion of, first of all, being clear about your aspirations. What is it that you're aspiring to do in an organizational context? What's the role that the organization aspires to play? and ground that in the changes in the world and how those changes are relevant, like market trends, internal trends, external trends, and really get clear about a statement of strategic intent. Then from there, the most important step, and where we found that even very senior leaders often go wrong when they think about strategy, is to reveal the choice and think about optionality, and ultimately create a strategy that is a set of options with underlying beliefs that create testable hypotheses and expected outcomes. Before you commit to that coherent action, you commit to a path, to a plan, you make database decisions and start executing with the opportunity to then iterate back and saying, well, if the market or reality tells me that my assumptions were wrong, that my hypotheses are not playing out, that I have to then choose a different path and go back into that choice space. So again, not rocket science, but like a simple way of codifying strategy. And then as we looked at this and said, well, how does this relate to leadership development and coaching? It turns out that this simple framework is actually almost identical to a leadership development and coaching framework, right? When I'm sitting down with a client and coaching them, I ask exactly the same questions. What's the change that you're looking for? What are your aspirations? What role do you want to play? What do you want to ultimately achieve? Then I go into a discussion on, what have you already tried? What might you try? What are the choices that you might be able to make? What are the supporting or limiting beliefs? What are the outcomes that you're expecting? And then I go and start offering them ideas for experimentation. What might you try? What homework might you do and come back with that might reveal whether that option that you're testing is the right one, right? So there's this duality between strategy and acting on strategy in a larger sense, and then ultimately the strategy that we have for our own development and for our own lives. And that led us to saying, well, what we're going to try here is really bring a coaching lens to strategy development throughout, and really kind of marry the art and science of strategy, encourage leaders to not look at strategy only as the logic and the hypothesis testing and the framework and understanding what pivots they will make, but also engaging in it in a team sport with each other, practicing the art of listening, feeling that they're valuing the input of others, empowering that reevaluation of strategy. And that led us to what we now do with many companies around the US, that says we're doing these, we call them strategy master classes, that are really a little bit of light teaching on strategy, but then mostly coaching and peer coaching, where leaders coach each others on how do they see the world, what are the aspirations, what are the options and beliefs, and we lead them through a process where they ultimately come out with their own strategy, and it can waterfall up and down, right? So generically, that's how we think about that first part of the question, what is strategy? And now, of course, I haven't talked about at all, how does that apply, or what is strategy in the age of AI? But I would say first and foremost, strategy still stays the same, right? Be clear about your aspirations, be clear about your options and your belief systems, take coherent action and iterate and test. Now, how do you apply that to AI? The first question I would ask, back to those transformation frameworks that we covered earlier, where are we in that phasing, right? Are we kind of in the efficiency phase of, this technology is being deployed for new efficiencies? Are we starting to see new business models? Are we seeing systemic transformation? The answer, if you look at the data, so this is not 100% today, but it's from late 2024, a McKinsey report on the state of AI that plots how are companies adopting AI and where is it being adopted. You see first of all, there's a lot of experimentation, right? So almost everybody is experimenting with Gen AI tools. there's more and more use cases that are being tried, but it's really still early days in terms of value capture. And most companies that were interviewed here are saying, we're not really at the stage yet where we're experiencing meaningful bottom line impacts. If it is, then it is at the top of this graph in kind of the marketing and sales, in the, pushing those efficiencies of how do I interact with customers, the AI chatbots, and so on and so forth. So generically speaking, I think very much still in that early stage of, just looking for the efficiencies and the linear impact. But if we believe that, this transformation is going to follow the same playbook, right? Linear efficiencies to business model transformation to then ultimately systemic transformation, there's probably a couple of things that we know, and many more things that we don't know. And the way I would articulate what we know is, so first of all, there's a lot of value to be unlocked here, right? Like in the way that up until recently, there was talk about data being the new oil. Now, if you listen to NVIDIA, Jensen Huang, and like the AI token factories, it's really the tokens and the monetization of that more structured, unstructured knowledge turned into structured knowledge that is the new oil, right? So tokens are the new oil. We also know that the infrastructure investment is stable and exploding in a way, growing. Last stats that I saw in terms of investment, Amazon, Alphabet, Microsoft, Meta, all planning to collectively invest order of magnitude $300 billion this year into AI infrastructure alone, right? So, which is up from 200 the previous year, right? So there's this stable growth in the infrastructure. The obvious use cases, again, those efficiency frontiers, that's what's being surrounded first. Enterprise ROI is still to be determined. We, I think, know that AI is starting to and will replace many of the traditional knowledge activities. And I would posit that these transformation patterns of, kind of linear new business models and then systemic transformation will repeat here as well. What we don't know is a lot more, right? Like, how does the interaction between different AIs and that, bot interaction lead to a whole new future of token-based computing? Obviously, things like, how much energy will this consume, and, some of the ethical concerns around that as well. The transformation of the timing by industry, I think you're starting to see some more, actually new capabilities, new business models emerging in places, for instance, like drug discovery, right? So some spaces are going to move faster, some are going to be, a little bit slower. The most difficult question to predict is that notion of AI-human interaction, right? To what extent will people want to be in community with AI, really interacting with AI, and how does that play out? An HBR article that I just saw this year that we were talking about before we started on this call is that one of the top private usage models, or the top private usage models for ChatGPT is actually just, again, asking questions, being community, having a friend, right? Somebody to relate to, right? But it might also be that at some point there's this, we get into the uncanny valley and there's more of a rejection of that type of interaction. And then most importantly, the thing that's probably impossible to predict is the shape of these new value networks that will emerge, the new platforms that will ultimately dominate, and the new marketplaces that will exist. But it's clear that they will exist. So with that, really, again, back to this notion of, there's so much uncertainty. We know Amara's law, this idea of we tend to overestimate the effect of a technology in the short run and underestimate the effect in the long run, which leads me to believe that if you think of notions like the Hyper-Gartner curve and where the Gartner hype curve and where on the hype curve is Gen AI and the different variants of AI, it's probably not the best framework to use to think about this transformation. it's much more a question of we're in this chaotic system where there's disruption on top of disruption, and really novel practices are emerging. So you have to, more than sense and react in no ways, you have to act and then sense and respond, right? In the Knefin framework, you're in that lower left-hand corner. And then what do we tell our clients to then do with all of this? Again, there's much more that we don't know than what we know. But if we were to boil it down to kind of 3 strategic imperatives and an action plan for an organization, it's kind of these 3 insights that, first of all, in this age of AI, what you need is a strategy. And that strategy starts with definition of a strategic North Stars, of knowing where you're going and asking the question how AI can help you get there, right? So clarify that strategic intent, but also make the strategy adaptive by using AI to model scenarios, test ideas, continuously refine the direction, because it is a new capability that can also be applied to the strategy domain. Second, this is also obvious. I mean, humans are still going to be in the mix, and you need a change management plan that leads that human journey. Whatever change you're trying to affect will not stick unless people somehow feel they're empowered, supported, and engaged, right? Where that takes us is to say, well, explicitly design for that human AI collaboration and foster a culture of learning where people in the organizations are encouraged to, again, interact, experiment, iterate rapidly, and build their skills alongside the technology. And then the third piece, which is probably the most important one, is to say, give AI a seat at the table in this, right? So embed AI into how you plan, decide, operate efficiently, intentionally, especially in terms of the decision cycles. Operationalizing AI can help you shift from a much more static annual planning cycle to a much more applicable model of continuously sensing, responding, with AI helping to generate and evaluate the options. But with all of that, always keep in mind that there ought to be ethical guardrails as well. So just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And you need an ethical framework as well that aligns AI with the purpose and the values of where you're trying to go, right? Because otherwise, there's a lot of power in this technology that might get misused in obvious ways, or also applied in ways that you don't even predict. So at the highest level, that's where we leave this, right? Is to say, if you want to think about strategy in the age of AI, so first of all, strategy as such doesn't change, right? So there is this notion of have a clear intent, have an aspiration, think about options, think about choices, think about your belief systems, and then ultimately, start testing and iterating. The testing and iterating, that's where AI actually disrupts the game of strategy as well. So having AI in the loop at the table, using those capabilities for faster cycles matters. And then don't forget about the human, the emotional piece, leading the human journey, bringing people along for the ride. And that's how you start at least making sense of a strategy in a very complex and very dynamic field. So again, I've probably told you a lot of stuff that you already know, and that sounds a little bit generic, but I will be the first to admit that I have a lot more questions here than answers. So with that, maybe let me just pause and invite the dialogue.
Excellent, and let me start by thanking you, Bernhard. Thanks for putting us back on the gallery view. I have a bunch of questions that I'm going to wait to ask, because I want to tee up 3 of the fellows who are with us today, who are going to lead off the discussion as respondents. And those are Nuri, Mickey, and Larry, who you can see. Nuri is currently traveling between someplace and an airport. So we're gonna set her up. Oh, there she is. Okay, Nuri, are you? Looks like you're available. Do you want to go ahead and make some comments for Bernhard and for all of us? Thank you.
Sure, I'd love to. Thank you so much. And thank you for bearing with me. I apologize. I am in a car, but I'm not the one driving, so I'm being very safe about that. But Bernhard, thank you so much for walking us through, sort of how strategy and AI can work together. I think one of the strongest points that you made that I really wanted to reflect on was giving AI a seat at the table and this idea of responsible AI. As you guys were doing introductions, I typed mine in because we were in a difficult internet spot. But some of my work that I've been doing over the past couple of years has been working with clients in communicating the value proposition of generative AI, especially as the average consumer becomes more knowledgeable about the impact of generative AI on their daily lives. So 5 years ago, even, the average person, and when I say average, I don't mean truly average across everyone, but the average tech user would not have been able to tell you what LLM stood for. And so now we have all of this language that we use around generative AI, around large language models. What are we doing? How do they work? What is safe? What is acceptable? We're seeing more in the news around the New York Times being sued even for what is allowed to be used in a large language model, what is not allowed to be used, what is public domain. So these conversations are cropping up. And what's important about that is this idea of ethical guardrails. So some of the work, am I cutting out?
You're right.
A little bit, but mostly you're there. So carry on.
My apologies, and thank you so much for all of your patience. So the idea of ethical guardrails, a very interesting conversation that I had with a client of mine that I'm allowed to speak to. Many of you maybe have used Grammarly to help with your writing. Grammarly has been using generative AI for 15 years now. And in the last 3 to 4, they've had to sort of explain to their users how generative AI works and how they keep their users safe. And one of the interesting conversations is that they've been really good about having a responsible AI team and ethicists and engineers who sort of work through what it means to be a responsible AI company. And one interesting conversation that I had with their head of responsible AI that I'll share with you, Bernhard, that applies to what you said is, this head of responsible AI effectively said, well, we want to make sure that we're intentional in how we use AI and how we explain to our users what they're using. Now, if we are not responsible in the large language models that we use, what ends up happening is, say, let's hypothetically use Big Cinnamon as an example. Somewhere down the road, Big Cinnamon lobbies to have only cinnamon be the key ingredient in all recipes. And your LLM uses Big Cinnamon's recommendation because it's only one singular LLM and they have ties to a political action party or act of some sort. And what happens is every recipe, including your lasagna, ends up with Big Cinnamon having an impact on your recipes that you have. And so what then? Do we start eating lasagna with cinnamon in it? And this is, of course, a silly example that we were talking about, but the sort of ethical guardrails, right? Where is this slippery slope and sort of define as responsible for your industry? And how do you leverage AI versus letting AI drive the conversation? And Bernhard, I don't know how you pull this off, but right before your presentation today, Sundar just yesterday said that AI is going to be bigger than the internet. Like, maybe this is, we all sort of feel this, and even sort of the graph that you showed, but that's excellent PR for your talk, I thought, as I was reading that article yesterday. But all that to say, I really think that what you're highlighting here in terms of strategy and the way that we define strategy and the way that we as experts in the space go out and help our clients to think through what a strategy. AI should be one of the tools in the toolbox and not driving the entire conversation. I think that's a really valuable thing to remember, regardless of how big AI is or is not. we helped our clients figure out how to leverage the internet and use the different technologies that came out and how to be a player in that space. Our clients are not the internet. And so how do we sort of drive it in that direction? So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Nuri. Bernhard, some comments in response, and then I'll turn it to Mickey for the same. Thank you very much, Nuri.
These are all such big topics, right? That we could probably spend, just 3 hours just scratching the surface on ethics. But how do you really create ethical guardrails? That's probably the hardest task in my mind, right? Because there's this tug of war going on where at the one hand you have to be in the game, and at the same time you should be clear about what are you doing, and in many cases you don't understand what's actually going on inside the black box. The best way I can think about it is just as you bring AI into the conversation and you leverage AI and you try to use AI in everything that you do, you should also resource the ethical conversation, those ethical thinkers, and make them part of the team as well. It can't be off on the side, right? Like we have this little ethics team that's thinking deep thoughts about, what should we do, what should we not do, creating some governance frameworks, and then, they're competing with the technology. That's not going to work. They need to be at the table as well.
Very good. Thank you. And Mickey, some thoughts on Bernhard's presentation?
Sure. Thank you, Roland, and thank you, Bernhard, very much. You started by saying, I think this was not going to be too complex or new ideas or anything innovative. Well, I'd hate to think what is. Having listened to that, there was a lot there. Thank you. There were a lot of layers to that, and maybe I'll try to add on to that a little bit without getting into too much details. Seeing a lot of what you said, absolutely, and definitely need to have AI at the table. You can't let the technology pass you by. You do get worried that you can't lose the human touch, and this gets into the coaching, and maybe we'll talk about that, because Nuri, I was thinking the same thing on the ethical piece, and yes, we talked a lot about strategy, about AI. Leads into your coaching business, and how do you balance, some of the ethics, the confidentiality that's such a worry with AI and things like that too. So I'm sure that's something you'll be looking at and probing, and then you get into things even related to our business around this, and I'm sure we all saw the CEO of Anthropic yesterday, and it's maybe a little self-serving for sure, on his part, but to say that 50% of entry-level white collar jobs, apologies, are at risk. And as a side note, in the search business, and we don't get into this level, but I've seen this even firsthand, and I don't know if others have seen it or even it coming out of Lehigh, but we've seen that recent college graduates are having even more and more of a challenge this year getting good positions, and it's even a combination. I mean, I'm here in the Baltimore, Washington area, so it's here in the Mid-Atlantic because of DOGE, and a lot of the DC cutbacks and things like that have hit. But, I even had two of my employees, one who graduated cum laude from Franklin Marshall, the other just got out of Columbia in public policy. But the first one's having to go to law school. The second one's thinking about going to med school because they could not find great opportunities. And these are young, amazing talents. And so it's a combination of things. And I just thought I'd pass that on. We do have to worry and see, about that. Again, so many layers. Sorry, I'm talking so much, but you're right. We can't lose the human piece. We focus on that a lot in our use cases with AI. And I'm interested when you're integrating AI and you're keeping it in the coaching and in the strategy piece, because it's so dynamic, there's so much information too in the coaching, but I'm wondering how, if I could, maybe especially for this group, how you overlay systems thinking in then to some of that, integrating the AI into the strategy and trying to bring systems thinking and that holistic way of looking at it. Is that something that you all are entertaining and looking at and have any thoughts on, Bernhard?
For this one, I'm going to call on Brandon. He's smiling because he knows this is coming. He's the systems thinker. So you want to respond to that one, Brandon?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for that question, Mickey. We think it's all about the systems. In fact, that's one of our taglines: start with systems. I'm a complexity physicist by training, and so that's kind of how I got into strategy, was actually thinking about how corporations struggle when their markets start to be disrupted or transform, and looking at it from a systems point of view. And so the quick answer is that whole first phase of our strategy masterclass framework that Bernhard described really is grounded in systems. We simplify it to say what's changing in the world, but what we really ask are what are the forces and the interconnected dynamics that are shaping your industry, and make sure you don't make a category error and think you're creating a strategy for product market fit when disruption is happening or something like transformation is happening. And so when we guide our clients through that process, we do get a little more deeply into those system thinking components that define the ecosystem and the market dynamics that are happening. Bernhard also emphasized that one of the second question after what's changing in the world and what is the system is what is the role we want to play. And I have a personal hypothesis that I cannot yet prove, that companies want to be in a position of eigenvalue centrality. So there's my wonky, geeky systems thinking applied to business strategy. Don't know yet if it's true, and I've sponsored academic research to try to prove this, that's the position that is most powerful, especially in a industry that is experiencing transformation. So maybe I'll pause there, Mickey, see if that resonated at all with you.
It did, and I don't want to take up too much time. So then how are you integrating AI then into the foundation or the background or the research? Because again, there's so much data, but there's so much constant change. You talked about, for example, Bernhard Amara's law. I think that takes me to Moore's law, and it seems like that's only accelerating too. So with all the data, all the change that you can utilize, I guess, AI for, how is that informing or leading into the systems thinking for strategy you're doing?
All right, very good. And we'll move on to the third of our respondents, which is Larry Starr. And Larry has also prepared some thoughts, and then we'll open it up for a more general conversation amongst all of us. Go ahead, Larry. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, my prepared thoughts are based on what I just heard.
That's preparation.
Yeah, look, I'm engaged with the idea of strategy and coaching, with the sense that you have clients that are coming to you and you're acting as a coach, and they're seeking help to understand what's going on. Now, I certainly understand the history and theory of how coaching has emerged, and I know something about strategic thinking and agility. And my question is, that you brought up the whole concept that the environment is increasingly complex and chaotic in many ways. And that means there is no prediction, that there's anticipation. You've also talked about the importance of hindsight. Now, what have we learned from the past? We've seen patterns, we've got individual instances of events in our company, because the people you talk to are mostly working in a company, I presume. And then you're asking them to develop insight and then try to discern what's going to happen and how they should manage it going forward. All in a world increasingly influenced by artificial intelligence. And that cannot be underestimated or overestimated. It's just an entirely different kind of context than anyone has ever lived in before. And the sense that you have some kind of control over it, for me, is a difficult concept to hold on to. I think at best, and we briefly talked about this at the beginning, there's a sense that AI is an augmented cognition. you're as smart as you are. And you're trying to figure out what to do. And you're working with organizations and you're making choices based on whatever you've been able to do. And then here's AI, and you reach out to it with a question, as you say, and it gives you some kind of answer. And you say, well, that's way more information than I could ever get on my own. It's surveying tons of stuff and telling me things and formatting and presenting it. Do I trust it? Is it always accurate? The answer is no to both. It's pretty good. It's really helpful, but AI hallucinates and makes mistakes. But it certainly gives me something. So it gives me a kind of augmented understanding for making choices. I think that's the leadership model that's yet to be fully developed, a kind of AI augmented leadership that, living in this different context. And it's not just another person you rely on, it's an entire environment that's coming at you in all directions. And it affects every kind of domain. And so the coach is talking to the coachee or the client, and you're trying to work with them. It's a harder concept than I'm familiar with. And I respect your concern, saying that we have a lot more questions that we just don't understand even how to formulate, let alone how to respond to. And therefore, giving advice is much more about dealing with complexity and uncertainty. And your models of how you think about those are both relevant. I'm not a system dynamics guy. I don't believe in the patterns being repeatable and any kind of repeatable format. I'm much more in belief that human beings suddenly make sudden choices and cannot be relied upon and cope with uncertainty in many non-linear ways and gets everyone into trouble, including the companies they're trying to lead. So that's my perspective of what you're saying. I think it's fantastic. Keep going, but there's just so much more that's unclear.
For sure.
That's my immediate feedback.
Yeah.
Bernhard?
I mean, I think the entire dialogue that we're having here is circling around the notion of ultimately the human AI to human and human to human connection, and like what are the dynamics that like we're the complexity lies not only in the complexity of the technology but also in the complexity of the relationships. And I mean, if there's one thing that I try to focus on and that I have confidence on is that the end of the day, humans are, yes, they may be unpredictable and make decisions that we can't predict, but they want to be in relationship. And I would posit they want to be in relationship with other humans as opposed to in relationship with technology. And that's where, in my mind, the coaching piece comes in, right? Like actually, there is an opportunity here, and even when Michael was pointing to knowledge jobs going away, or Mickey was pointing to knowledge jobs going away, I think where the shift in my mind happens is towards relationship jobs and relationship management and like that connection piece, right? So, which is why to me it's so fascinating to look at strategy, AI, technology disruption, like all those things that are going on, and then every single time, how do you bring the human dimension into it?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's part of the culture as well. I mean, we are human beings. So whatever culture in which we are engaging or whatever context we're engaging, it starts first with the human dynamic.
Right. Unless at some point the AI takes over and we could become the pets of AIs. And like I've been musing about this, like, what does my dog like to do? My dog actually doesn't like to hang out with dogs that much. She wants to hang out with me because I fulfill her needs. Right. So, and there was just as a dystopian point of view, I read an interview with Richard Dawkins the other day where it's like, where is AI going? And his point was, well, this is evolution. It's probably not going to end well for Homo sapiens. But, at the end of the day, if it doesn't end well for Homo sapiens, then, again, that's just evolution. It's a jump in the DNA, right? Our DNA is going into a different substrate. But so anyway, but I have confidence, at least in my lifetime, that we're going to be wanting to be in relationship with people, right? And that's why the coaching piece is so important.
Let me turn it to Nuri, and then we'll open it up for a general dialogue. Go ahead, Nuri. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm happy to not be moving at the moment. So thanks again. I wanted to just kind of touch on this idea of the human interaction piece. I think it's so important. There's been a lot of research around the fact that, Google DeepMind and Google has been using breast cancer data to diagnose, like AI can diagnose breast cancer almost better than a human doctor with lots of experience even can. And so a lot of physicians are struggling with, what do we do with this, right? Like, are doctors now obsolete because AI can do this job? And the answer is absolutely not, right? Because of that human interaction. AI cannot understand what the context is of a patient's history or the way that they live or other risk factors in a way that a good doctor can, right? So this idea of systems thinking, how do you sort of, at the hospital level, for example, get doctors to retrain their thinking or incorporate AI as opposed to reject AI and just say, no, we're going to do our jobs and not use this tool that is incredibly accurate. So how do we sort of reframe that and get them to incorporate and accept, maybe even, and leverage to help their patients better? So all, I think it's really an interesting kind of real life example of how we as experts in the space can go in and encourage different clients, whether in healthcare, doctors, et cetera. But that one to me stuck out as you were talking about that human touch and that human need.
All right. Thank you. And at this time, as I said, I think we want to open it up to the whole